Welcome everyone to our Town Hall series, Equity Starts with Access. My name is Jamie Bruni-Miles, President and CEO of the YMCA of San Francisco and co-moderator for tonight's discussion. Throughout the Town Hall series, we seek to create a space for community members to engage in meaningful conversations and gain a deeper understanding of the issues we're collectively facing. Tonight, we will talk about the changing landscape of philanthropy and how the pandemic has shifted the power dynamics of giving. We will hear from San Francisco's philanthropic leaders as they address this changing dynamic. I want to start by thanking our panelists this evening. Josue Estrada, Chief Operating Officer, Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. As COO, Josue Estrada serves as the strategic advisor and leads the organization's central and operational teams. Josue brings a wealth of organizational experience, having served in senior business leader roles at multiple Fortune 500 technology, logistics, and consumer companies over the course of his career. Josue previously served as a COO for Salesforce.org, responsible for the overall strategy of the organization during a time of significant growth. He's a champion of diversity, equity, inclusion, and I'm honored to work with him closely as a member of our board of directors at the Y and our Diversity, Inclusion, and Global Engagement Committee Chair. Elena Chavez-Quezada, Vice President of Programs, San Francisco Foundation. For the last 3 years, Elena's primary responsibility is to ensure that the San Francisco Foundation Program Division advances the equity agenda through internal collaboration, centering grantees, and engaging key community partners. Elena is also involved in community organizations outside of San Francisco Foundation, where she's a founding partner and advisor for the Closing the Women's Wealth Gap Initiative, sits on the Leadership Council for Immigrants Rising, serves as board co-chair for the Asset Funders Network, head of investment for the Chavez Family Foundation, and appointed by the mayor to serve on the San Francisco Citizens Committee on Community Development. She's also third generation Mexican-American from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Becky Ferguson, Vice President of Global Philanthropy, Salesforce. Becky has more than 15 years of experience scaling social good initiatives globally. Prior to joining Salesforce, she spent 9 years at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation as a Deputy Director of Strategy and Planning. In this role, she managed large international grant portfolios and led strategy, planning, and management activities. Her professional experience also includes positions in grassroots community organizations, the Dutch Planned Parenthood affiliate, and UNESCO's education sector across settings in the US, Netherlands, France, Spain, Ethiopia, and India. Thank you, esteemed panelists, for joining us this evening. As a community, we're facing two pandemics. COVID-19 struck as an invisible enemy responsible for more than 460,000 deaths and counting, and economic losses that continue today with losses of millions of jobs. Secondly, COVID-19 has heightened our collective awareness of racial inequities that have existed for centuries. Both issues impact our communities in complex ways that are often hard to comprehend. Now more than ever, we are pressed to find innovative solutions that ensure our communities can thrive. When COVID-19 hit, the Y quickly adapted our programming to address the needs of community. Even now, we continue to provide safe spaces for young people to engage in school through our academic enrichment hubs, access to food pantries, mental health services, family support, and expanded adult wellness services. To ensure these services can continue, all nonprofits depend on philanthropic support to be sustainable. Tonight's discussion is meant to educate us on the need to adapt to our current reality, even our concept of giving. Specifically, we're convening key leaders to discuss the changing landscape of philanthropy and what we need to do to be informed of this new reality. Now I'd like to introduce my co-moderator, Jeremy Welland. Dr. Welland has more than 20 years of experience as a data and analytics leader in technology, financial services, green energy, media, and management consulting organizations. He recently joined Google, where he leads digital transformation initiatives with a global team of data scientists, analysts, engineers, and technical program directors. Dr. Welland volunteers with a number of Bay Area nonprofit organizations, and we're extremely fortunate to have him on our board of directors at the Y, where he chairs our Mission Advancement Committee. Dr. Welland is on the adjunct faculty at the University of Pacific School of Engineering and Computer Science, where he teaches the future generation of data scientists in the master's degree program. Jeremy lives in Marin County with his wife and children. Our format tonight is to ask the panelists questions for 45 minutes and provide you, the audience, an opportunity for questions for the last 15. To ask questions, please enter them in the Q&A section, but please feel free to ask questions throughout the evening because you're important. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and let's now get started. Dr. Wellen, you will have the first question.
Thank you, Jamie. And good evening to the audience and the panelists. And thank you all for joining us. I'd like to jump right in. So my first question is about the new Biden administration and the potential policy implications. I'd like to direct it to Elena with the SF Foundation. So how will the change in administration affect your philanthropic activities, and how will it inform, if at all, your strategic planning during the next 3 to 5 years?
Thanks so much for the question, and it's such a pleasure to be with you all today. Thank you for the invitation. This is a huge moment, and to put it mildly, I think it's pretty transformative. Even though we are a local community foundation serving the 5-county Bay Area, and I want to just start with the main reason why I think this is going to be transformative for us is our focus on racial equity is now something that is really upheld within the administration. And we see that playing out in the appointments and some of the changes that have been happening. And I'll also just say, housing is one of our main objectives. And I think anyone here in the Bay Area can understand the tremendous challenges that we have with housing when it comes to housing production, preservation of affordable housing, protecting those who are currently in affordable housing, preventing evictions, which I think we're all very nervous about as we think about this pandemic and the toll that it's taken on millions of families just in the Bay Area, let alone across the country. So I would say that when it comes to housing in particular, we're also very optimistic because, again, as a local community foundation, so much of our work is at the city, county, regional, and state level, but that is inextricably tied to what's happening at the federal level. So we see a lot of opportunity there to advance the goals that we have around housing. And as I started with, I think the focus on racial equity and really having that be a centerpiece for all of the work that we do as we think about the communities that are most marginalized, that have the highest number of unhoused people. These are really the communities that we're talking about here, and feel optimistic that there'll be some more attention to those communities.
Elena, thanks for that. So Josue, same question on policy.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Jamie and the wife for inviting me to this panel. Such a great honor to be here with you. As Elena was saying, we're seeing very positive signals so far on the changes that the administration is doing. And that is just so inspiring and so positive in the way that our programs have been operating and working in the past. And I can give you a couple of examples. We recently made an announcement on shipping our immigration process and grantees and programs to an organization that we have been funding in the past called Forward.us. And they have been right now in the middle of immigration reform and advocates for that matter. And what we made is a commitment right now to support this organization, to continue our efforts with our grantees and get them into a place that this opportunity, with the administration changes and in the policies that they are being now open to make a radical change. And that's what we're looking forward. There's other places that we also work here in CCI. One of them is on COVID-19. Our science team and the partnerships that we have across the board has seen that there are still these positive signs on how we can advance, how we can get better, not only into the testing, but the administration of the vaccine. So we've seen positive changes all along. And we are, taking advantage of many of them and helping many organizations that were looking forward to these changes and rising to the moment, as we said.
Wonderful, thanks for that. And Becky, I'd like to turn to you and have the same question on policy.
Yeah, and I'll also just start with a thank you to the Y and Jamie and Jeremy for holding this conversation. And it's also great to be here with Elena and Josue, and two organizations that I really admire for the philanthropic work that they do. I think from my perspective, we will certainly continue to advocate for policies that promote economic empowerment, education, and reskilling at both the federal level, but also, as Elena mentioned, at local and state levels. I also think, you know, a newer area for us philanthropically, where we're putting more energy into, is in the space around civic education and engagement. And I think over the coming years, we will continue to make philanthropic investments, especially around continuing to protect voting rights. And also even, you know, within the walls of our own company, continuing to promote civic engagement, sharing nonpartisan information with our employee base. And even this year, for the first time, US Election Day was a national holiday for all of us, to encourage us to give back, to get involved with the issues in our community. So I think that I expect will continue to be a part of how we work and how we show up.
Thank you for that. So now I'd like to ask about public-private partnerships and start with Josue from CZI. So the Y has leveraged public-private partnerships to the great benefit of the community during the pandemic and otherwise. So as a funder of institutions, what types of partnerships would you like to see forged? And can you expand on the notable benefits of these collaborations?
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy, for that question. We came to realize, and after working in Salesforce.org as well, that philanthropies by themselves, they cannot, you know, make the changes that we want. So it's all about collaboration. It's all about partnering with the right organizations. We've seen not only nonprofit to nonprofit or government to nonprofit, but, you know, for-profit organizations rising up again, as we've seen this pandemic, as we've seen, you know, the social unrest that we had for last year. And it's all about that. I can tell you, like, we can all do much in terms of what is the philanthropy and, you know, the money that is poured there. But without that collaboration and partnerships, I think it's going to take us longer. And the time is now. And, you know, we need to make some of these changes that will advance positively many of the missions. And for people that is, you know, are on the other side, they want to see changes now. So I can tell you a couple of places where, you know, CCI, since, you know, the time that CCI was formed by Priscilla Chan and Mark Zuckerberg, they had values as they were created, and one of them had been collaboration. And we take that very seriously in forms of all the initiatives that we have. All the program officers, they really look forward to partner with grantees, but also other organizations, and, you know, form coalitions, form a positive environments, let's say that, that will allow, you know, that we foster change and we go, you know, to tackle a problem. I'm going to tell you an example. The Chance Zuckerberg BioHub is an organization that also was co-founded by Mark and Priscilla, and is all about the collaboration with other institutions, Stanford, UCSF, and UC Berkeley. And they all wanted to come together. There's a lot of great research being done in these institutions, but we know that as we partner, as we collaborate, as we share, the tackling of many of the diseases is going to be easier and faster. So there's a clear opportunity that we see right now in these partnerships with other organizations, and we still need to think about outside of the box. That's what I would probably say, that we are just at the beginning. And I think as we see the development of philanthropy, and specifically the causes that we all care about and we want to move forward, we'll see that collaboration being more looked at and sought after by many institutions, not only, again, nonprofit organizations that we know we collaborate, but we also need the power and the abilities and the funds for many of these for-profit organizations. And a great example is also Salesforce, that I'm pretty sure, Becky, you can also chime in and tell us a little bit more about that.
Josue, thank you. Yeah, it's great to hear about healthcare, university, other partnerships you're forging. So we'll push this question forward now to Becky. Can you tell us more about what you're doing in the space of public-private partnerships?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Josue that, the issues that our organizations are working on are, much bigger than any one foundation, any one or company, any one entity can solve on its own. So I think there is just truly real power that comes through partnership, especially when we can bring different assets, capabilities, perspectives together around a challenge and an opportunity. And a couple things come to mind that I am particularly excited about right now. One, for instance, is the funders coalitions, where groups of funders and companies come together to pool resources around really specific and targeted goals. So one effort we're a part of as Salesforce is called the Reboot Representation Coalition. It's about 20 companies that have pooled their resources, companies that otherwise, like outside of philanthropy, might be in competition with one another. But in this perspective, we have rallied together around a shared goal of doubling the number of Black, Latinx, and Indigenous women graduating with computing degrees by 2025, recognizing that the trends in that data are actually moving in the reverse direction, and really bringing our resources together to support opportunities to build a diverse pipeline of women interested in entering the tech sector. And it's just really exciting to bring our experiences, our dollars together in a collective way. And we can achieve much more together, I think, than we could alone. And then, I think also, I don't know if I'd call it a partnership as much as like a movement, I would say, is sort of the Pledge 1% movement that Salesforce helped to create, which is basically this idea as a company to make a commitment very early on for how you want to give back to the community, how you can use your people, your product, your equity to support the community and your stakeholders. And what's so cool about that is I think now there's over 12,000 companies that have joined that movement, and they're doing so at very early stages. So while they might be very small now, they're going to grow, and making that commitment early on means that is also going to grow with them, which I think is really exciting to see that being seeded in so many young companies. And that makes me excited about the future of corporate philanthropy in particular.
Becky, I would agree. I love the aspect of a superordinate goal to bring folks that maybe wouldn't normally work together to have them rally around similar causes. So Elena, I know a lot is going on at the SF Foundation. Can you talk about the same topic, public-private partnerships?
Absolutely, I'd love to. I think the main thing I want to start out by saying is it sounds a little bit cheesy, but the whole is truly greater than the sum of its parts. So I think from a kind of philosophical perspective, that's kind of where we start from. But I would also say, even if you're looking at it from more of an economic perspective or nuts and bolts perspective, it's simply inefficient for the public and private sectors to not be working together. There's duplication of work, or there are synergies that the opportunity costs that we avoid when that doesn't happen. One of the things I'll lift up, like I started out by talking about housing, which feels like such an kind of unsolvable problem in the Bay Area. So the magnitude is so great. And so I think, for us, with launching the Partnership for the Bay's Future in partnership with CZI and many other corporate partners here in the Bay Area, we're able to make a dent. And I think that momentum is what starts to drive it forward. And it really is just incredibly heartening to see how corporations have stepped up and are really saying this is seemingly unsolvable, and that's where we can come in. Another example that I just wanted to lift up of public-private partnerships is just the leadership of the treasurer's office here in San Francisco, Treasurer Jose Cisneros, who has really had some groundbreaking programs around financial well-being for low-income communities of color. And one that I worked on earlier in my career and have funded over the years, called Bank on San Francisco, became a national model. And it really is saying working with financial institutions to say, we have millions of unbanked and underbanked people in your communities that you're serving, and how can we make your branches and your products more accessible and safe for these communities. And then the last thing I'll just lift up when it comes to public-private partnerships is the importance of staying grounded in community. And I think what often happens in our various silos is it becomes harder sometimes to hear the real hard truth of what people are experiencing on the ground and have that drive the policies, have that drive the investments. And I can say hands down, the most impactful conversations and kind of game-changing conversations I have in my job now at the San Francisco Foundation is when I have the real privilege of being able to talk directly to workers and others that we're trying to help in the long term.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. My next question, and then I'll turn it over to Jamie after this round, really has to do with economic recovery. And I'll start with Becky with Salesforce. So, many grant-making organizations are focusing their giving on helping advance the economic recovery strategies and resources for nonprofit organizations. So can you talk about two things? Number one, how are you meeting your organizational goals during a COVID-produced recession? And number two, can you tell us more about what you're doing with this new trust-based philanthropy movement?
Yeah, I think one starting tenet throughout the past year has been just kind of communication. So for instance, we started having company all-hand calls about a year ago, where we would literally get on the phone, all 60,000 of us, with our executive leadership team, board members, sometimes outside experts, and talk about what was going on within the company, outside of the company. And that is something that we have continued to do over the past year. We're still doing that. And I think that has been incredibly important for us all to stay connected and stay relevant to the issues, and also create transparency and space for real, live, unscripted kind conversations like these. So I think that has been super important. And then, the other thing is, like so many of us, we had to really move quickly, learn, adjust, sort of question the old ways in which we were doing things. And for instance, for starters, we just reached out, connected with a lot of our partners to listen and understand what their needs were. And we stopped doing silly, unnecessary things like, hey, don't send us a report right now if you're focused on other stuff. You need to extend a timeline. Fine. This program doesn't make sense anymore. Let's just switch this grant to Gen Op support. Just kind of like understanding where our partners were at the moment and what they needed. We also opened up totally new and different forms of funding that we hadn't envisioned at the start of the year, for instance. So just providing fast, super flexible funds for our partners so that they could better adapt to the situation at hand and move their programming to a digital environment. We also opened up small business grants, which was something we hadn't expected to do if we had looked at our original plans for the year. And I think what we have tried to do is carry that forward and really try to keep our partners at the center of the work that we do, and look at how can we best support them to be strong, thriving organizations. And I think some of these conversations are things that sometimes get referred to as trust-based philanthropy, which is really about how as funders, I think, do we get out of the way and really help our partners do great work and reduce some of the unnecessary kind of burden, process, paperwork that doesn't really truly support the impact that I think that we're all trying to make. So I'm optimistic about that conversation, those topics. I think that they've been alive in the philanthropic space, but I think the last year has supercharged them in a way that I hope will stick with us into the future.
Yeah, Becky, exciting. And thanks for all those comments, especially around trust-based philanthropy and what you're doing, being agile and flexible, meeting folks' needs during COVID. So for the same question, talking about economic recovery, Josue.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy, and also, Becky, listening to what you guys have been doing and how 2020 took everybody by surprise, right? And many small nonprofits were really badly hit, and they did not necessarily know how to cope with, even you mentioned digital formats. Fundraising events then turned to be now digital, and people didn't even have Zoom formats, and how am I going to be paying for that, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things that we saw is, at least here in CCI, is like the whole organization came together. It was a crisis mode. And that was, number one, great to see, because we're operating in this crisis. There were things like even ourselves were trying to figure out how we're going to be working remote. When we, as an organization, we're all based in headquarters, and a lot of the business was done, or business I call it, but our interactions were very important through a cup of coffee or lunch or here and there. Volunteering was definitely, that changed a lot dramatically. And what we saw is people within CCI that care a lot about how we can show up for our grantees, for the people that were in the front line. And it was untested territories, right? We didn't know how people will be reacting to some of that training, what were the needs. Our movement and capacity building team, they basically redefined one of the aspects that it was organizational capacity, and how we're going to be offering trainings and things to our grantees so they can survive in a time that it was critical. And I can tell you, we have all adapted to this new reality, but still many people are still struggling. And, part of what, you mentioned and you asked about, like, are we meeting our goals? And thankfully we had been able to do that, but not without a cost, not with looking at, having that part of like shaking up on, not only from the pandemic, but also from the perspective of, social unrest. That hit many people as well. And we're talking about how this pandemic is potentially more damaging to some of certain demographics, people that may not have the opportunity to be, having a steady work, and, that needed to be back in the office or so on for, just cutting a check. And I think that is been tough, to see. We certainly had been thinking about how do we even come back, and in this new reality, as Becky was saying, we're very hopeful that at some point we're going to be passing of the weather. There's going to be waves as we see it, but that economic recovery is going to be fundamental and foundational. And specifically in the many areas that we have, from education, all our efforts were into how we're going to be supporting the kids that are using our platform, and how can we do that. And we even went ahead and start seeing the possibility of testing different tools that are going to be helping and useful for many of our teachers that need to have that relationship with the kid. Science is all about COVID, stopping the spreading, or having the ability to provide testing in a faster way and more accessible to people. And certainly in the community, that's with the other places, housing, that we're looking at how we can be more nimble and start providing with again, not only resources, but probably even the know-how that we were very fortunate to have, but not many people did. So I'm really looking forward to this recovery. Is going to be taking time, unfortunately. We're seeing good signs. As I mentioned earlier, with some of the administration, the new administration, making some solid changes, but it will require that partnership that we talk about. It will require all of us to chime in, and it will take a village, as we say.
Yeah, Josue, thank you for that. And Elena, quickly going to you, same question, just on what you're doing around making sure to support folks and meet your goals for economic recovery.
Yeah, it's such an important question, and it's really inspiring to hear my co-panelists speak to this. I think I want to start by saying I think recovery sometimes infers that you're going back to where you started, and that's a good place to go. And I think what we're really trying to keep front and center is that where we started was not good. And it was actually a really poor economic reality for millions of people. And so we see this as an important time to kind of reevaluate and reset so that we don't go back to normal, because normal really wasn't good enough. And I think I want to just underscore what Becky said around listening, because I think that, in fact, we just spoke to an organization yesterday and asked for their kind of frank, what is the best philanthropic partner they've ever had? And they just said somebody who listens, who actually takes it in, listens, and acts on what is recommended without coming into the conversation with a predetermined set of priorities. So that has been certainly our focus throughout the pandemic and always, but crisis kind of shakes you up, and it makes you reevaluate. And it while you can say you're listening, are we really listening? And so that's I think been very core. We started an emergency response fund. We're very proud of the ability to reach very small grassroots organizations who are at the front lines of meeting the need. People lined up at the food pantries at their local churches, and we've seen with the faith community in particular, who are always kind of the first responders for many crises throughout our history. We've seen the faith community really step up here too, and so that's been part of the relief. The other thing, two quick other points. One is that I think we can also leverage investment dollars to address economic recovery. So for our program-related investments program, our PRI fund, we are focusing some investments in small business, investments in things like the Oakland Community Land Trust, ICA Fund Good Jobs, the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Corporation. So I think these are other ways to kind of put dollars to work to address economic recovery and look at like the fundamental underlying systems issues. So EDD, the Employment Development Department, for example, antiquated system, millions of people not getting their unemployment insurance claims processed. The times call for us to not only respond to the need that millions of people, need money to pay the rent or put food on the table, but also to reevaluate the antiquated systems that we have and address those.
Elena, thank you for that. So I'd now like to turn it over to Jamie for the next set of questions.
Thank you, Jeremy. I want to make sure I hit a few things that you said, Elena, and you've all said something really powerful and you're saying it together. But one thing you said is real hard truth, right? That I heard you say that. And also the normal is not good enough. So my questions for Josue, and I'll ask all of you the same question if you can think it through, is let's talk about systemic racism. If those two things are true, real hard truths and normal is not good enough, we know that the 2020 has exposed systemic issues across this country. We talk about housing, economic insecurity, all those, the impact of COVID on individuals of color. So it's allowed all of us to kind of rethink about our priorities on things that has been around for a long time that have just been exposed at a level that requires organizations to do something different. So Josue, the question's for you. Specifically, CZI announced something new called the California Black Freedom Fund. Can you walk through how this was developed? What is this targeting? How this addresses that the real hard truth and the normal is not good enough that Elena was talking about, and walk us through that. And if the other panelists, please also think about things that are changed because of 2020 that addresses the systemic racism that's in front of us right now.
Yes, Jamie, let me answer that question with the hard reality of where we are as a country, as a nation in systemic racism that we see. And it's a topic that many people have been talking about it, but probably not in the mainstream as we have seen in the last year. And that started with the murder of George Floyd. That triggered the point not only here in the US, but we saw that globally. And I think it was at the point and the time with the pandemic, with everything that is happening, that people are just probably feeling that enough is enough, right? But the question is how we're going to be doing that and where we're going to be starting, because you cannot just boil the ocean. You cannot just go, at it without having a strategy and a plan. And, part of what that started, at least for us, I can tell you, is it threw us for a spin internally within CCI, people asking internally about like how we are managing that within CCI, but also how we're going to be applying racial equity into many of our grants, for example. And we took it seriously and we actually thought about it and realized that it requires a lot of effort and it requires resources and it requires a commitment that is going to be for the long run, which is, by the way, another of our values here in CCI, build for the long run. What happened then was a series of events, from the perspective of if we were going to be talking about racial equity, what does that mean? Where we're going to be starting, how we're going to be helping, where. And we started to form by group of volunteers, people that raise their hand internally, passionate individuals. That's why they actually joined CCI at the beginning with a mission-oriented part of creating a future for everyone. But we cannot create a future for everyone if we don't put the people that are the ones that have been affected the most, either politically or socially or economically, and being marginalized by many of the systems that we have in place. So the realizing of that was part of what drove us. It drove us internally to think about where we're going to be putting the efforts and how we're going to go about it in a way that makes sense and it's building blocks. So as we were putting criteria internally, looking at where many of our initiatives were working already and applying some of these, what we call racial equity lens as part of our programs, we started to see the possibility of even, going further. And the commitment that I was talking about is all about how, not only putting an ad in the paper and saying, yeah, we're with you, we're with you. And this is how we're going to get these things done. And again, talking about partnerships, it's all about empowering people that for a period of time had been in the shadows or have not been having the fortune to have access to resources that typically other organizations, don't, or demographics, to that extent have had the opportunity to do that. So as we were, going and unraveling these and, people were around the country thinking about like the organizations that were forefront, when we heard about the California Black Freedom Fund, that it was the first of its kind, it's like, we need to be part of this. And we need to be part of this in a sense of the commitment that we have as an organization to give opportunity, in this case, for Black power building and organizations here in California that are trying to make a change. And make a change will take time, but you need to start somewhere. So as we further develop our commitment and start thinking about the criteria that we're applying, we knew that we need to make something, extraordinary and bold and solid. And we announced in December a $500 million commitment to improving racial equity. And that is going to be through organizations that are actually moving that, and also within our partners internally in many of our initiatives and how we're going to be tackling that over the next 5 years. So it requires, I can tell you, thinking outside of the box, probably going in places that traditionally you don't go there or in the past, or it has been like nice to have, or, not in the forefront. But as I was mentioning, the time is now. I mean, we cannot talk about this all the time. We need to action. And that's what we're doing. That's what we're hoping to do with liaising with more organizations that want to see some profound change. And we're here to support them. And you will hear more about, our intention and our programs as we're continuing to developing, because we don't have all the answers, right? That's the other thing. Like we're seeking also for people that had been doing this for some time, and many of us probably have the same individuals that we tapped on, but we need to go about it. Right? Enough from the talk, and let's start actioning.
So you're basically saying foundational changes address systemic issues, and that's what you're talking about right now. So Becky, Elena, either one, talk about how you're looking at your own organization to address those systemic changes or foundational changes to address systemic racism. Either one of you can go first. Becky, you want to start? Elena?
I'm happy to jump in, and I will just say, echoing Josue, I think we also really tried to push ourselves to sort of say, how do we go beyond just solidarity statements and truly look at the commitments and actions that we would make, both internally to look at how do we create an equitable workplace, and also how do we contribute to that in the community. We've also, I think, come at it in a way that I think is promising and different than some of the other work we do, which is really to look kind of fully across our company as a whole. And so in June, we formed what we call as the Racial Equality and Justice Task Force, and it works across not just a philanthropic response, but first and foremost from a kind of people lens. How are we building a company that really lives true to one of our 4 core values of equality? So we have, we've set new commitments and targets specifically internally around our workplace. Philanthropically, we have made additional commitments on really supporting community-based organizations to drive change. And then also on the kind of purchasing front, we have been looking at, okay, we're a really large company. We spend a lot of money with a lot of businesses. How can we make sure through our purchasing and our supply chain that we are supporting Black and Brown-owned businesses? And we've made commitments around what that's going to look like. Also expediting the payment terms for those businesses, looking at kind of a different aspect of the company and how we can hopefully make a positive contribution. And then similarly with our venture and investment portfolios, really looking at how can we support diverse founders who are starting and growing new companies. And then also on the policy front. So I think really trying to look at it from multiple angles has been a core principle of how we have been showing up around this super important topic issue, and one that is something that we're going to have to hold true to and stay committed, as Jose was saying, for not just this moment, but for the long haul. And so those are a few ways in which we have been looking at it as a company and making those commitments public across our employees, but also more broadly as well. But yeah, I'm excited to hear from Elena, because I know this has been such a core part of how the San Francisco Foundation has operated for years. So yeah, I'll pass it over to you.
And Elena, if you can also, when you get ready, talk about power building. You've mentioned it a few times in your talk as well, please.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of almost an overwhelming question, because it is just central to the identity of the San Francisco Foundation and Fred Blackwell's leadership when he started 5 or 6 years ago to really center racial equity. So when we're asked the question, how have things changed for the San Francisco Foundation, or how have your strategies changed? Obviously we're constantly pivoting and wanting to be responsive, but at the core, not so much. Like the core is about racial equity and economic inclusion, and that is at the heart of everything that we do. I wanted to say a couple of things. One is, the topic of this panel today is the future of philanthropy. And I actually think part of really leaning into the future and a bold future that maybe defies or redefines what we've done in the past is really looking at the past. And so one of the things that we have been grappling with, and it's just a fact, is that philanthropy exists because of the tremendous wealth accumulation that has often been built on the backs of low-income communities of color throughout our history. And so that's something that I think, is an important kind of reality check for philanthropy as we think about the future. And the other thing is, what Josue said about building for the long run. I mean, that's not philanthropy's strong suit. I think philanthropy has been well known for needing, yearly metrics and impact. And if you don't meet that widget count, you might not get funded for the next year. And when we're talking about systemic racism, it took us centuries to get here. So it's certainly not going to take a few grant cycles to make a dent. So I really appreciated that. I think some of the things that I'll just highlight that we're doing, I mean, all of our work is focused on racial equity, as I mentioned, and we have this strong power building lens. So the idea is, change comes from community. Lasting change is not done unto people. People know what they want and need to be successful and to prosper. And so for us, investing in community organizing and power building at the kind of grassroots community level is a really core strategy and a long-term strategy. It's not one where you see the impact immediately. You might fight for years and years on a bill or paid family leave or marriage equality or whatever, so many things. And the history tells us it takes a lot of time to get it right. If it even, I mean, there's always room for improvement. So the other thing we've really done, and I think is very hard, and I won't sugarcoat it, is leaning into the discomfort. So talking about systemic racism, racial equity is really can be very hard, and it's very personal. And certainly we have that external focus, and I think that's really important. We are investing in organizations led by people of color, serving people of color. We want to hold ourselves accountable to metrics and data around that. I think accountability in philanthropy is a whole other story. But I think leaning into the discomfort, not just externally, those tough conversations, but internally. And so I think others mentioned, some internal work that they're doing. We have an internal equity working group. And, there are really hard moments and really hard conversations. And I think leaning into that and embracing it really, and knowing, there are no easy answers. This is not a checkbox type of thing. This is kind of a long-term existential kind of way of seeing the world. And so those are just a few thoughts I would share.
Thank you for that. And now the time for you as an audience to ask questions directly to the panelist. So Dr. Wellen will handle the questions for the next few minutes.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. And thanks everyone for the answers. A lot of really great discussion going on here. So our audience has a number of things that are coming in. So I'm just going to start here with the first question. With so many nonprofits in the Bay Area, and of course, many more nationally, they're all doing great things. How do you choose your partners? So I don't know who wants to raise their hand. Josue.
Yeah, I mean, I can start. I can tell you it's tough, meaning there's so many, as you guys are pointed out. For us, is quite straightforward, meaning they are aligned with our programs and the missions that we have in advancing education, in advancing science, and in this case also in the communities that we work and live, which is here in the Bay Area. And how are we going to be helping them in different places? The other aspect is on housing, for example. We have a solid program that we have been working now for a period of time, and with some of the announcements that we made, we're still very much committed with advancing that program and choosing the right partners across. It's unfortunate, of course, that we cannot necessarily reach out to everyone and so on, but we are here to listen. And if people are interested into joining our programs or learning more, I encourage you guys to go to our website. There's a lot of information that you can be able to take from there. And there's places where you can start engaging with our staff.
Thanks for that. Anyone else want to chime in? Elena.
I think similar to Josue, you know, we have like any funder, we have our priorities and our kind of with so much need out there and so many wonderful organizations. This is what is the hard part of being a funder. I mean, the wonderful things are about being able to support organizations. The part that I really don't like is having to not fund all of the great organizations that are out there. So that's the reality. I mean, I think for us, you know, the work around economic opportunity, building worker power, promoting community wealth, decriminalizing poverty, housing and displacement, movement building, these are some of the priorities that we have. And I think, you know, it is on us as funders to be as clear as we can about the areas that we fund. And just for us, no surprise, the racial equity piece is really front and center. So I think, you know, really taking a look at investing in leaders that represent the communities that they're serving to the extent possible, that there is that kind of equity lens that's core to the work that they do. And also that there's a responsiveness to the community. So like the folks that are being served, that are getting services have a voice in whether that service is effective or not, and that it's improved and developed accordingly.
Thanks.
I might just chime in and quickly add, I think, yeah, very similar to Elena and Josue, we definitely have an aspect of finding where there is shared alignment. So I think we try to understand, okay, what is your strategy as an organization? Are we, do we have that shared strategic overlap? We really don't want organizations trying to do gymnastics to fit in with our funding priorities. So trying to find where there is that shared alignment. But then we also have a few other programs that actually are very accessible to multiple nonprofits. So for instance, all nonprofits are eligible to receive up to 10 free Salesforce subscriptions. That is totally issue agnostic. There's, you know, now the entry to that is relatively easy. And similarly on our employee inspired giving programs, we're able to match employee donations annually to, I think, you know, over 10,000 organizations. Many of those are small community-based organizations that our employees are really passionate about. And it's nice to be able to have almost that kind of portfolio approach, which allows us to have some areas of giving are super strategic, really targeted, but also some other areas that are much more open and flexible for different types of organizations, large and small. So kind of having those different channels has also been something I appreciate about the nature of a corporate philanthropy.
Becky, thanks for that. And we have a lot of engagement out there. So maybe switching up the format, we'll do a 1-for-1, one question and one respondent. But the next one here, you know, we've talked about building long-lasting relationships a tiny bit, especially given I was struck by the response of, you know, if you want to combat things like racism, you know, it took a long time to get here. So I guess the question is, how do nonprofits build long-lasting relationships with funders to take on some of these long-term systemic issues? And Family Feud rules, first hand up gets the answer.
Elena, you want to take this?
Sure. It's such a great question. I think, how do nonprofits build long-lasting relationships with funders? I think it's part of it is about building the trust, and that I think a lot of the onus of that is on the funder. And so you alluded earlier to this movement around trust-based philanthropy, which I want to call some attention to, because I think the whole premise of it is to fundamentally disrupt the power dynamic in funder-grantee relationships, because it's incredibly unproductive. And so the transformative relationships really happen when there is trust, when there is a longer term relationship, when you're not counting, when you're not bean counting, but you're actually thinking about like longer term transformative change. And so I would say, you know, I think about this question a lot from the perspective of philanthropy, because I feel like we have set up some systems that are incredibly ineffective at building trust. And so this movement around trust-based philanthropy is really important to me and grounds the way that we're trying to approach all of our grant making. And I think the advice that I give to organizations, you know, and this is really challenging, and I have been on the fundraising side for many years as well, is, you know, the ways that you can respectfully challenge your funders to embrace that model if it's appropriate, and to say, you know, it is impossible for me to have the kind of change that you publicly seek in 6 months or 1 year or with a $25,000 grant. And I know I say that with a lot of caution, because I know it's very hard. And I will say, I think a lot of the onus for transformative relationships and long-term relationships falls on funders.
Elena, thank you for that. We have time maybe for one or two more. You know, we've talked a lot about values and alignment with the funding priorities of each of your organizations. A question has come in stating, you know, what one generational impact would you like your current work to have in the future, and how can it be tied back to raising awareness with youth today?
Becky, you want to take that?
Or Becky?
Sure. That's a great question. I think one thing I think a lot about, just myself as a person managing individuals and managing teams. You know, I think about the impact of my individual actions, the impact I can have in an institution. And I think that really looking at how we sort of shake up and create different pathways into meaningful employment for individuals who come from different backgrounds, in order to break the kind of cycles of poverty and create more intergenerational wealth. That is something to me that I can see at both a macro and a micro level, right? I can feel it within my own team and teams I've worked with, when you have folks who come from diverse backgrounds and perspectives and pathways, like you just create really vibrant conversations and workplaces. And so I've experienced that personally. And then I think, yeah, you can multiply that times 100, times 1,000, times tens of thousands. I feel like I would love to see more shifts in creating those more meaningful pathways into employment from folks from all sorts of different backgrounds. So that's a hope and a dream that I definitely carry with me, and I try to live it out where I have my own, where I can have my own kind of decisions, actions, make a contribution.
Becky, awesome. I echo the sentiment. Jamie, I'll turn it back to you.
This is what the series is about. Equity starts with access. Asking individuals, organizations about their thinking about the times we're in. So I want to thank all the panelists for being incredibly insightful, for being present, and for adding information so we can take it and learn as we're trying to make sense of the world we live in today. So thank you all for being here tonight. I do appreciate it. And I want to thank Dr. Welland, of course, for being my co-moderator tonight. I always appreciate moderating with you. So thank you, Dr. Welland, as well. And finally, the audience. You're here, you're present, you engage with us. And so we want to thank you for taking your time. Time is a precious commodity today. And we want to thank you for taking that commodity and spending it on us as well. So have a great night, everybody. Thank you for this. And we'll have it for you posted later if you'd like to see it or share it later. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Excellent.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thanks.